Hello and welcome to NewsClick. We are discussing today the issue of asbestos in India and around the world. A private member's bill has recently been introduced in the upper house in Parliament, calling for a complete ban on white asbestos, which is still permitted in India, one of the few countries internationally to still allow it. To discuss this and related issues, we have with us today Barry Castleman, well-known international environmental activist and consultant specializing on asbestos. First, let me get your overall take on asbestos as a hazardous and toxic substance.
Well, the big picture is that an increasing number of countries have banned asbestos, almost 50 countries, and the global use of asbestos came way down in the 1990s, came down by about half, but then it's leveled off since then. And the reason is that India and China are using 10% more each year, and that's offsetting the reductions in the other countries. And it's a real tragedy because it's being used in building materials. 90% is used in asbestos cement, roofing sheets, and pipes. And this is a very serious danger to the construction workers who might cut and drill and saw these products, or be obliged to do so in the course of building maintenance, repairs, and renovations and demolition.
In most of the countries which have banned asbestos, the ban extends across all types of asbestos.
Right.
India seems to be following the example of some countries, notably Britain, for example, which is quite late in including white asbestos in this category.
Well, Britain banned asbestos 10 years ago.
10 years
White
ago.
asbestos.
Yes.
And there were certainly European countries that were ahead of them. But the white asbestos accounts for 95% of all the asbestos ever used. And for the asbestos industry to say that all the asbestos disease must have been caused by the other asbestos is not believable. And it hasn't been believed by the World Health Organization or the International Agency for Research on Cancer or anybody else that's independent and knowledgeable. But that's their story and they're sticking to it. So they keep on with the propaganda. They have advertisements in the newspapers in the Times of India this past week talking about safe white asbestos. And this is the propaganda that they buy with their advertising money.
Yeah, this is certainly one of the key points that they keep coming out with. And obviously the spate of advertisements is because of the bill which is pending in the House. One of their points is that white asbestos is safer because the fiber lengths are safer, it is not hazardous to health, and so on. And they even in fact have cited before reports from WHO supposedly saying that evidence against white asbestos is inconclusive.
Well, that's nonsense. The WHO has said that white asbestos and all the other forms of asbestos cause cancer and asbestosis, a lung scarring disease. And this is beyond dispute. This is not a matter of controversy in independent scientific circles.
The second point which the asbestos industry in India keeps harping on, and which, as you would know from international experience, has also been the practice of asbestos industry world over when it comes to defending themselves, is that asbestos used in India is largely bound up with asbestos cement, and therefore it is safer.
Right, well, it's bound up until you take a power saw to that sheet of asbestos cement, and then you get a blindingly thick cloud of dust full of respirable asbestos fibers. And so, I mean, this is something that's been, that's obvious.
Sure.
It's the foreseeable intended use of the product, and it's associated with very substantial hazards. So this too is just industry propaganda. I mean, I regard the asbestos industry as a criminal industry. We're talking about an industry that knows that the more product they sell, the more people they kill. They're like the tobacco industry. And I refer to the local industries. There are no more multinational asbestos companies left.
Sure.
They're all national enterprises in Brazil and India and everywhere else. And I think of them as local chapters of the asbestos mafia.
Right.
They understand that in order to avoid the costs of prevention and compensation, they need to develop an unholy and corrupt relationship with the government, and they've sought to do this. There's some people in the asbestos industry are members of parliament. They own asbestos interests. They build an asbestos plant in Sonia Gandhi's district. They, own media interests as well. I mean, these people aren't stupid.
Sure.
And they play this game for keeps.
There's also been this discussion, particularly raised by the asbestos industry in India, about the Indian standards for asbestos content in the air. Now, to my knowledge, the Indian standard is, I think, 1 fiber per cubic centimeter or milliliter.
I think so.
Whereas the US standard is about 1/10.
Right. That's right.
That. How does this rate in comparison with standards in other countries?
Well, most of the industrial countries have a limit of 0.1.
Yeah.
Because that's the lowest reproducible level that can be measured using the classical methods of measuring exposure. So it puts
Right.
a floor on how low the limits can be set.
So from your experience, both in the US and elsewhere in the world, how have groups managed to raise the issue sufficiently to bring in regulatory norms or bans?
Well, it's been done by civil society. There are asbestos victims groups who've been very important in Australia and in Britain and in some other countries, also the US. Of course, public health workers, politicians, attorneys representing asbestos victims making claims for compensation is very important because compensation is a large part of prevention, and once the industry has to start paying for all the death and disease that they're causing, then it becomes a lot less profitable to be in the asbestos business. And so we've seen this in one country after another. So the media, of course, is important. You basically try and use all the instruments of civil society to bring about a social movement in order to shut down the asbestos industry. And as I say, this has been done in a number of countries. It's just very hard in India because the instruments available are so limited. Almost nobody gets compensated for asbestos-related disease. The National Institute for Occupational Health was named by the Supreme Court as the sole authority for rating disability from asbestosis, but NIOH won't even tell the workers that they examine whether they have asbestosis, so they can't file claims and get compensation. So there's a lot of these kinds of problems that make it hard to bring about changes.
And in fact, the National Institute of Occupational Health in India, there were scientists who published articles on the dangers of asbestosis. The articles were suppressed and the scientists moved out. And the opposition to asbestos from within the NIOH was silenced as well.
The industry is very powerful in India. They're very powerful.
Recent conferences internationally, which are periodically called to discuss this under the Rotterdam Convention and so on, have discussed the issue of a complete ban on asbestos. But India, as one of the large importing nations, has till now at least been joined by Russia, Kazakhstan, China as large exporting and user nations to stymie this.
But those other countries all have large asbestos mines.
Yes.
So that helps tend to explain why they might be
That's
using
right.
asbestos. But India imports all this asbestos.
That's right.
And
Fully.
it's really much more tragic in the case of India that this goes on, that the buildings and the pipes aren't made out of safer materials, so that there won't be this continuing danger to all these workers and all the people that inhabit these buildings for the rest of the century.
Is there any way by which national rules and regulations can be subsumed under international conventions?
I don't think so. I mean, the Rotterdam Convention is an example where countries tried to agree on prior informed consent.
That's right.
The warning of the intended recipient country that something that's being exported is so bad that it's been banned in two or more parts of the world as toxic, ultra toxic. And asbestos, chrysotile asbestos, white asbestos, has certainly been qualified by the Chemical Review Committee under the Rotterdam Convention for listing because it's been
Sure.
banned in 4 continents.
Sure.
Yet it only takes one country to block listing. That's the weakness of the convention. So the problem with these international conventions is that no country wants to give up its sovereignty, and no country wants to have any other country impose anything on them. And so in this case, at the Rotterdam Convention meetings in Rome in 2008, a year ago, a handful of countries were able to block the will of 126 countries
Sure.
at the meeting because there was this need for unanimous consent in order to include asbestos, chrysotile asbestos, and endosulfan. And India
That's right.
was
Involved with
opposed to
both.
listing both of those.
Yes. Any last thoughts on the subject of asbestos?
Well, I just think that I'm hoping that as more doctors get involved, as more activists get involved, as the problem in India becomes more visible, that this will create the conditions where we'll be able to start to bring this under control in India. But right now it isn't happening.
Thank you, Barry.